I stood frozen on my driveway. The sound of heavy machines shaking the ground. Police cars lined up outside my gate. And then I saw it. The first swing of the excavator slammed into my walls. My dream home by the lake was crumbling, brick by brick. The HOA claimed I didn't pay them, but I knew the truth. What they didn't know is that I hold something much bigger. And when they found out, everything changed forever. Welcome to HOA Karma Stories, the place where we share real homeowner battles and the shocking power struggles inside American neighborhoods. My name's John. I've lived in this lakeside community for more than 20 years. I'm just an ordinary guy, but I've seen the ugly side of HOAs like no one else. Before I take you deep into this story, do me a favor. If you're over 50, grab your reading glasses, sit back, and hit that subscribe button like you're signing an old letter, steady and firm. And let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? I still remember that morning like it just happened yesterday. The sound was the first thing that woke me up. Not birds, not the soft wind from the lake. But a deep rumble, the kind that shakes your chest before you even open your eyes. I thought it might be thunder, maybe a storm rolling in over the water. But when I stepped out to my porch, it wasn't thunder at all. It was steel, heavy machines crawling down the road, flashing lights bouncing off the glass of my lake mansion. I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of it. Two giant excavators were parked right in front of my driveway. Beside them, 3 police cars lined up like this was some kind of crime scene. Neighbors were already outside, whispering, pointing their phones, recording me like I was about to be on the evening news. And then it hit me, this wasn't an accident, this wasn't a mistake. The HOA had actually shown up to take my home. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. For years, they had been after me, fines for grass that was too long, warnings for the color of my shutters, even letters about my mailbox being too modern. It never stopped. They wanted control, and I wasn't the kind of man who bent down easy. But this? This was something I never thought they'd dare to do. They said I didn't pay their fees, thousands of dollars in unpaid dues. But I had the receipts. I had the proof. I had cleared everything. They didn't care. They wanted me gone. I shouted at the officers, "This is my property. You can't just do this." One of them wouldn't even look at me. Another just told me to step back for my own safety. And as I stood there, helpless, the first swing of the excavator's arm came crashing down against the side of my home. The sound of cracking wood and breaking glass filled the air. My living room window exploded into tiny pieces. The walls that had seen birthdays, holidays, and family dinners were being ripped apart like paper. I felt my stomach twist. Every memory I had built in that house was falling, second by second, into piles of rubble. And standing right across the street, arms folded, with a smug smile on her face, was the HOA president herself. Her eyes locked on mine, like she was enjoying every second of my pain. I shouted again, "I paid you. You know I paid you." But she just shook her head slowly, as if she was the judge, the jury, and the executioner of my entire life. The neighbors gasped as the excavator tore through the roof. Some of them looked sorry, some of them looked entertained. But nobody, not a single person, stepped forward to stop it. That's the thing about HOA power, once they decide to make an example out of you, most people stay quiet, too scared to be the next target. I stood there frozen, fists clenched, powerless as I watched the walls of my dream collapse. And yet, deep down inside, I wasn't done. Because while they thought they had destroyed me, I knew something they didn't. I held a card they could never play. Something that would turn the entire game upside down. But at that moment, I stayed silent. I let them think they were winning. I let them believe they had taken everything from me. Sometimes, letting people underestimate you is the best revenge you can plan. I stepped back as the machines pushed further inside, tearing apart my kitchen, smashing the staircase, pulling down the beams. Every strike was a knife in my chest, but it also lit a fire in me. I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The sound of neighbors talking carried across the street. "Can they really do this?" one asked. "I heard he didn't pay for years," another whispered. Rumors spread faster than truth. Nobody knew the real story. Nobody knew the fight behind closed doors, the meetings, the threats, the letters that filled my mailbox almost every month. To them, I was just another homeowner who lost a battle with the HOA. But I wasn't just any homeowner. And this wasn't going to end the way they thought. I stared at the HOA president one last time. She smiled, and I smiled right back. Not because I was happy, but because she had no idea what was coming next. You see, while they believed they had stripped me of everything, what they didn't know was that I owned something far greater than a single house. I had been planning quietly, carefully, for years. Buying property after property, lot after lot. Until slowly, the block that she ruled was no longer hers to rule. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. I let the dust and the noise cover the truth I was holding. I let the cameras capture my defeat. Because when the time came, the shock on their faces would be worth every single brick they knocked down that day. And so I stood there, arms crossed, eyes locked on the destruction of my mansion. And deep down, I knew. This war was far from over. Now let me ask you something. If this had been your home, your dream, standing there helpless while it was destroyed in front of your eyes, would you have fought back the way I did? Or would you have walked away and let them win? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know, what would you have done? I didn't sleep that night. How could I, after watching years of my life collapse into dust and debris? The smell of broken wood and concrete still lingered in the air. Even hours later, I could hear the echoes of those machines in my head. That crushing, tearing sound, it haunted me. But if the HOA thought I was defeated, they were wrong. They might have knocked down my walls, but they hadn't touched the foundation of my plan. And that's what kept me awake, not sadness, but strategy. You see, this wasn't the first time the HOA came after me. For years, they had tested my patience. They sent letters, they sent threats. At one point, they even tried to put a lien on my house. But here's the funny part, every time they thought they had the upper hand, I quietly took another step. While they were busy harassing me about weeds in the yard, I was buying the property next door. While they threatened me about violations, I was closing deals on rental homes down the street. And while they wasted energy trying to humiliate me at board meetings, I was signing papers that gave me control over lots they didn't even know were for sale. Little by little, piece by piece, I was becoming the landlord of the very community they thought they ruled. And the best part? They had no idea. I kept it quiet. No big announcements, no flashy signs. The titles were in my name, the deeds locked in my safe. And by the time my lake mansion was targeted, I already owned more than half the block. But let me take you back a little. Because the way this all started shows you exactly how dangerous an HOA can become when the wrong people get power. The first time I clashed with them was years ago. I had just painted my shutters a deep navy blue. To me, it matched the lake, it gave the house character. But to the HOA president, it was against community standards. She showed up on my porch, wagging her finger like I was a child. "Either repaint them or face a fine," she said. I laughed, I told her it was my home, and I wasn't changing a thing. The next week, a fine showed up in my mailbox. $100. The week after? Another one. $200. Then $500. And that was just the beginning. Every time I refused to bow down, they added something new. Trash cans left outside too long, violation. Mailbox height not matching uniform code, violation. My truck parked in the driveway overnight, violation. They were relentless. But here's what they didn't understand, I wasn't the type to bend. I grew up believing a home is a man's castle, and nobody tells you how to live inside your own castle. So instead of breaking me, they fueled me. Every fine I paid, every threat I received, pushed me further toward my plan. And the plan was simple, take their power away from the inside out. Now fast forward back to the night after my mansion was destroyed. The neighbors slept in silence, but I sat at my desk with a single lamp on. I opened the safe, pulled out a stack of documents, and spread them across the table. One deed after another. Each property name, each lot number, each signature in bold ink. I smiled for the first time that day. Because those papers meant one thing. While they had destroyed my house, I had already destroyed their future. But there was one problem. The HOA didn't know yet. And timing was everything. If I revealed too much too soon, they might try to fight back with lawyers, with lies, with politics. I had to play it smart, and I had to let their arrogance dig their own grave. The next morning, I walked the neighborhood. People stared at me, some whispered, some pretended not to notice. The rubble of my mansion was still there, yellow tape around the property like it was a crime scene. Children rode by on bikes, pointing at the wreckage. The HOA president drove past in her shiny black SUV, her window rolled down just enough for me to see her grin. She thought she had one. And I let her think that. I smiled back, nodded my head, even waved like nothing had happened. Because I knew one move from me could end her empire. But first, I wanted her to make the next mistake. You see, when people get power, they want more. And when they think you're weak, they push harder. That's what I was counting on. Because the harder they pushed, the easier it would be to crush them completely. That week, I got another letter in the mail. This time it wasn't about unpaid fees. It was about removing the rubble of my house within 14 days or face daily penalties. I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped the paper. They tore my mansion down, and now they wanted me to pay for cleanup. Neighbors shook their heads when they saw the letter. Some told me to give up, to sell the land, to move away. But I didn't. Because I knew something they didn't. The HOA was sitting on borrowed time. As I stood there, staring at what used to be my home, I thought about all the years I had been fighting them. All the battles, all the letters, all the warnings. It all led to this moment. And I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every neighbor who had ever been bullied, fined, or shamed by the people in charge. This was about proving that nobody, not even an HOA, could strip a man of his dignity, not without facing the consequences. The sun set behind the lake, the golden light reflecting off the broken glass scattered in my yard. I made a promise to myself right there. They may have destroyed my house, but I was going to destroy their power. And as I turned away, I couldn't help but wonder. How many people out there are dealing with the same thing? How many of you watching this have faced an HOA that pushed too far, that crossed the line, that treated you like you didn't even own your own home? Tell me in the comments, have you ever been bullied by an HOA? And if you were in my shoes, would you have fought back, or would you have walked away? The morning after that letter, I walked back out to the rubble of my home, and for the first time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt something else, fire. The HOA thought I would bow down, that I would run away in shame, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I stood in the driveway, surrounded by broken bricks, splintered wood, and shattered glass, and I laughed. It wasn't the laugh of a defeated man, it was the laugh of someone who already knew how the story would end. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, some shaking their heads, others whispering behind half-closed blinds. To them, I looked like a fool. To me, I was a man standing on a battlefield, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, the HOA made their boldest move yet. 2 days later, another notice arrived. This one was stamped in red ink, bold letters across the top, final warning. It said I had to not only remove the remains of my demolished mansion within 14 days, but also pay compensation fees for disturbance to the community. Compensation? For what? For them tearing down my house? I could barely believe it. Not only had they destroyed my home, but now they wanted me to pay them for doing it. I held the letter in my hands, my fingers shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about power. They wanted to break me completely. They wanted to show every homeowner that if you defy them, if you resist, they can erase you and charge you for it. But what they didn't realize was that every step they took against me was only tightening the rope around their own neck. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in the small rental I was staying in temporarily. The lamplight flickered over the stack of deeds spread across the surface. Each paper whispered the same truth: I own more of this neighborhood than the HOA itself. And yet, they acted like I was some outsider who didn't belong. I leaned back in my chair and thought about my father. He used to tell me, "Son, a man doesn't lose when his walls fall. He loses when he gives up on his ground." And those words came back to me like a storm. I wasn't giving up my ground. Not now. Not ever. The next day, I walked straight into the HOA office. It was a small brick building near the entrance of the community. I pushed open the glass doors, and there they were, the president and two board members, sitting behind a polished oak desk. The same smug look on her face, the same cold eyes that had watched my home crumble. I placed the letter on her desk. "This is illegal," I said. "You destroyed my home. You have no right to charge me for anything." She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "You had unpaid fees," she replied calmly. "You ignored warnings. We followed procedure. You're lucky we didn't fine you more." I clenched my fists, but I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I pulled out one document from my folder, the deed to the property next door to hers. Her eyes flickered when she saw it. She tried to hide it, but I caught that flash of surprise. "You think you know this neighborhood," I said slowly, "but you don't know half of it." I didn't slam the folder down, I didn't make a scene. I simply turned around and walked out. Because the truth was, I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to beg. The papers in my folder would speak louder than any words. But as I left the office, I could feel her eyes burning into my back. She knew something wasn't right. She knew I was holding a card she couldn't see. And that's when I realized the game had changed. The HOA wasn't just coming after me anymore. Now, they were scared. They were hiding behind rules, behind red ink and threats, because they felt the ground shifting under their feet. I walked back past my demolished home. The rubble was still there, covered in dust, yellow tape flapping in the wind. But this time, when I looked at it, I didn't see loss. I saw bait. The HOA thought they had trapped me, but in reality, they had walked into the trap I'd been setting for years. And that thought made me smile. Because I knew what was coming. And when it came, it would be bigger than any house, any fine, any letter. That night, as I stood by the lake, I asked myself one simple question. Was I ready to reveal everything? Or should I let them push harder, dig deeper, and bury themselves in their own arrogance before I struck back? The water was calm, the reflection of the moon dancing across the surface, and I made my choice. Patience. Revenge is always sweeter when your enemy thinks they're still winning. So I waited. I waited for the HOA to send their next letter, to call their next meeting, to make their next demand. Because every move they made was leading them closer to the moment they'd lose it all. And as I stood there, breathing in the cool night air, I thought about all of you watching this. If you were in my shoes, standing in front of your demolished home, holding the deeds to half the neighborhood, would you reveal your power right away? Or would you wait in silence, letting your enemies dig their own grave before showing your hand? Tell me in the comments, which path would you choose? The days that followed felt heavy. Every morning I would walk past the ruins of my mansion, and every evening I would see that yellow tape flapping in the wind like a flag of victory for the HOA. But what they didn't realize was that every brick they knocked down only made me stronger. One evening, as the sun was sinking into the lake, the orange sky reflecting on the broken glass, I noticed something strange. Two board members were standing at the edge of my property, clipboards in hand, pointing at the rubble, writing notes. They weren't just there to observe, they were planning something. Something bigger. The next morning, it arrived. A certified letter, sealed and stamped. I opened it slowly, almost amused, because I already knew it wouldn't be good news. Inside was a notice declaring my lot a community hazard. They demanded I clear the rubble at my own cost, and if I didn't, the HOA had the right to auction off the land for safety reasons. Auction off my land? They had already stolen my house, now they wanted the ground it stood on. I felt a fire rise inside me, hotter than anything I'd felt before. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was war. I could have marched into their office again. I could have shouted, threatened, called lawyers right then and there. But I didn't. Because I understood something they didn't: timing is everything. If I struck too early, they'd see it coming. If I waited just a little longer, they would walk straight into my hands. So I played along. I pretended to be worried. I let them believe their letters had me cornered. I even showed up at one of their public meetings, sitting quietly at the back while they discussed me like I was some criminal. I listened as the president raised her voice. This homeowner has disrespected this community long enough. We followed procedure. He ignored us. He owes us thousands. If we don't act, the whole neighborhood will think the rules mean nothing. The board members nodded like sheep. Neighbors whispered. Some pitied me, others judged me. And me? I sat there calm, quiet, a faint smile on my face, because while they were busy talking about rules, I was holding the deeds that made their rules worthless. After the meeting, a neighbor stopped me in the hallway. He was an older man, gray hair, tired eyes. He said quietly, "I'm sorry for what they did. They fined me last year for putting up a flagpole. I couldn't fight them. But maybe you can." I nodded, and in that moment I realized something powerful. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every single neighbor who had been bullied into silence. That night, I made my decision. No more waiting. No more silence. The time had come to reveal the truth. I spent hours preparing everything. Deeds, contracts, proof of ownership. I put them in neat stacks, labeled, highlighted. And then I called for my own meeting, not in the HOA office, but at the community hall by the lake. I put flyers in mailboxes, slipped notes under doors, and waited. The day of the meeting, the room was full. Neighbors packed the chairs, some standing at the back, curious. The HOA board sat at the front row, whispering among themselves, clearly annoyed that I had dared to gather people without their permission. I walked to the front, placed my stack of papers on the podium, and looked every single one of them in the eye. "My name is John," I said slowly, my voice steady. "You all know what happened to me. You saw my home demolished. You heard the lies they spread about unpaid fees. But tonight, I'm going to show you the truth." I picked up the first deed and held it high. "This is the property next door to the president's house. I own it." Gasps filled the room. I picked up another. "This one? The two-story home on the corner. Mine." Another gasp. "And this, and this, and this." One by one, I laid them out like cards in a poker game, each one striking harder than the last. By the time I was done, the table in front of me was covered with documents. The room was silent, every eye wide, every mouth open. And then I spoke the words that changed everything. "I don't just own a house here. I own most of this block. And that means the HOA cannot control me. In fact, it means I have the power to dissolve this HOA completely." The silence broke into chaos. Neighbors whispered, shouted, some even clapped. The president stood up, her face red, her voice shaking. This is nonsense. He's lying. These documents mean nothing." But before she could finish, one of the neighbors in the back shouted, "Let him show us the signatures." So I did. One by one, I showed the titles, the contracts, the county seals. Every single paper was real, undeniable. And the president's face went pale. That was the moment the power shifted. The moment the community realized the truth. The HOA wasn't untouchable anymore. They had destroyed my mansion, but in doing so, they had unleashed the very thing that would destroy them. As I walked out of that hall, neighbors patted me on the back. Some thanked me, some apologized for staying silent before. And for the first time since the demolition, I didn't feel alone. I felt like I had an army behind me. But I also knew, this fight wasn't over yet. The HOA wasn't going to go down quietly. They would fight, they would threaten, they would twist every law they could find. But the difference now? I wasn't fighting in the shadows anymore. I was fighting in the open, with the truth on my side. And as I stood under the night sky, looking out at the lake, I thought about the irony of it all. They tried to erase me, and instead, they erased themselves. Now let me ask you something. If your community board tore down your home, spread lies about you, and then you had the chance to take away all their power with one bold move, would you show your hand like I did? Or would you have waited even longer to crush them at the perfect moment? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how you would play this game. The night after that meeting, I barely slept, not because I was restless, but because I could still hear the whispers from the neighbors echoing in my head. For the first time in years, the power had shifted. The HOA president, who used to walk around with her nose in the air, had left the hall with her face pale, her hands trembling. And me? I walked out like a man who finally had the crowd on his side. But power is a dangerous thing. When people feel it slipping, they don't just give it up quietly. They fight, they scratch, they claw to hold on to it. And I knew the HOA wouldn't go down without a storm. The very next morning, I got what I expected, a letter from their lawyer. A thick envelope, filled with legal threats. They accused me of fraud, of misrepresentation of ownership, even of fabricating documents. They wanted to scare me. They wanted me to think that even with the truth on my side, their lawyers and money could bury me. I sat at the table, sipping my coffee, reading line after line of their nonsense, and I smiled. Because while they thought I was some ordinary homeowner fumbling through papers, what they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this fight long before the first brick of my mansion fell. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, not just any attorney, but one of the sharpest real estate lawyers in the state. When he answered, I simply said, "It's time." And he knew exactly what that meant. By the afternoon, my lawyer had already filed countersuits. We weren't just defending me against their claims, we were attacking them for illegal demolition, harassment, and abuse of power. And when the news hit the community, it spread like wildfire. Neighbors who once stayed silent now had courage. Some came to me with their own stories: a woman fined for planting roses instead of the approved flowers, a veteran harassed for flying his flag, a family nearly forced to sell because of endless fees. They were scared before, but after my reveal, they saw there was a chance to fight back. And suddenly, it wasn't just me versus the HOA anymore. It was the whole neighborhood rising against them. Of course, the president didn't back down. She doubled down. She sent out community emails painting me as a liar, a troublemaker, someone trying to destroy the harmony of the neighborhood. She stood at the entrance gates, speaking to anyone who would listen, spreading poison about me. But here's the thing: once people see the truth, lies don't hold the same power anymore. Her words fell flat. People rolled their eyes, ignored her, even laughed behind her back. The queen of the HOA was losing her crown, and she knew it. Still, the legal battle began. Courtrooms, hearings, stacks of documents taller than a man. They argued, they twisted, they tried every trick in the book. But every time they swung, I countered. Every deed, every title, every piece of evidence was on my side. I remember sitting in that courtroom, watching her at the table across from me. Her hands shook when my lawyer placed the pile of property deeds on the judge's desk. Her face turned red when neighbors testified against her. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. But this wasn't just about fear, this was about justice. I wanted her to feel exactly what she had made me feel: powerless, cornered, defeated. I wanted her to understand what it meant to stand on the edge of losing everything. As the case went on, the pressure grew. News spread beyond the neighborhood. Local reporters came knocking, asking for interviews. Headlines read, "Homeowner versus HOA, Mansion Demolition Sparks Legal War." The story became bigger than just one block. It became a symbol of what happens when power goes unchecked. And deep down, I knew I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every homeowner in America who had been bullied by an HOA, every family that felt helpless against the people who claimed to protect the community. One night, after a long day in court, I walked past my demolished lot again. The rubble was still there, the weeds had begun to grow between the broken bricks. I stood there quietly, listening to the night, and I realized something powerful. That pile of ruins wasn't just my loss. It was the foundation of my victory. Because without their arrogance, without their greed, they never would have handed me the very weapon that would destroy them. And as I turned away, I caught sight of the president's house across the street. Her lights were on, her blinds half open. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. She quickly pulled the blinds shut. She was hiding now. And me? I was just getting started. The legal war was ugly, expensive, and exhausting. But every day, I walked into that courtroom with my head high, because I knew something I couldn't lose. Not with the truth on my side. Not with the block in my name. Not with the community slowly standing behind me. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just a battle for a house, or even a neighborhood. This was a battle for respect, for dignity, for the idea that a man's home, no matter how big or small, is his castle. And no board, no president, no set of rules has the right to tear that down. So I ask you, as you sit there watching this, picturing the rubble of my mansion and the smirk on that president's face. If you were in that courtroom with me, fighting not just for your home but for your entire neighborhood, would you stand tall and fight until the very end? Or would you let the so-called rules crush you the way they tried to crush me? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know, are you a fighter or a follower? The courtroom battles dragged on for weeks, then months. Every time I thought the HOA couldn't sink lower, they found a new trick, a new lie, a new way to twist the story. But here's the truth about lies, they never last. The more you stack them, the heavier they get, until the whole tower comes crashing down. And that moment finally came. It was a gray morning when I walked into the courtroom, the kind of day where the clouds hang heavy and the air feels thick. I remember taking my seat, my lawyer beside me, stacks of documents ready. Across from me, the president sat stiff in her chair, papers clutched in her hands, sweat already shining on her forehead. The judge called the session to order. And then, the hammer fell. One by one, the evidence was read out loud. Property deeds with my name on them. Bank records showing payments I had made. Emails from the HOA board, some of them mocking me, some of them plotting against me. The walls they had built around their lies were falling, brick by brick, in front of everyone. And then came the moment that changed everything. My lawyer held up the demolition order, the very document they used to justify tearing down my mansion. He pointed to the signature at the bottom. It wasn't stamped by the city. It wasn't signed by a judge. It was signed only by the HOA president. The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "This isn't a legal order," he said slowly. "This is an abuse of authority." The president's face went white. She tried to speak, but her words stumbled, fell apart. For the first time, she looked small, powerless. Neighbors who had come to watch began whispering, shaking their heads. Some gasped, some muttered curses under their breath. The truth was finally out in the open. They hadn't just overstepped their power, they had completely fabricated it. The judge struck the gavel. The demolition was ruled illegal. The HOA was found guilty of abuse of power and ordered to pay damages. And in that single moment, the empire they had built collapsed. I leaned back in my chair, breathing deeply, letting the victory sink in. Not because of the money, not because of the ruling, but because justice had finally spoken. They tried to strip me of everything, but in the end, they stripped themselves. The aftermath was chaos. The president resigned within days. 2 board members quit, disappearing from the neighborhood completely. The HOA's funds dried up as lawsuits from other homeowners began pouring in. And slowly, the monster that had ruled our community for years fell apart piece by piece. But here's the twist, while the HOA collapsed, I rose. Because remember, I didn't just own one home here. I owned the block. So while they were busy licking their wounds, I stepped in. I called a community meeting, this time not in secret, not in fear, but in broad daylight at the Lakeside Hall. The place was packed. Neighbors old and young, tired of years of harassment, came to hear what came next. I stood at the front, not as a victim, not as a fighter, but as a man with a vision. I told them, this neighborhood doesn't need tyrants. It doesn't need petty rules and power games. What it needs is freedom. What it needs is respect. The room erupted in applause. For the first time, people smiled. Not out of fear of who was watching, but out of relief that the nightmare was finally over. From that day on, the HOA was no more. The bylaws that once chained us were shredded. The fines, the warnings, the threats, gone. And in their place? A community that finally felt like home. Walking through the streets after that felt different. Neighbors waved. Children played without their parents worrying about violations. Flags flew proudly, gardens bloomed in colors never approved before. The lake sparkled the same way it always had, but now, it felt freer. I sometimes walked past the empty lot where my mansion once stood. The rubble is gone now, cleared away, nothing left but open ground and the reflection of the water. People ask me if I'll rebuild. Maybe one day. But to me, that empty space isn't a loss. It's a reminder. A reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked, and of what happens when someone decides not to bow down. I glance across the street sometimes, at the house where the president used to live. The blinds are always shut now. She barely shows her face. And when she does, it's not with the smirk she once wore. It's with the look of someone who knows they lost everything. Funny thing is, she thought she owned the neighborhood. But in the end, it turned out I did. And that's where the story of my mansion becomes more than just about a house. It's about dignity, about standing tall even when the walls fall down around you. It's about showing bullies that they can take bricks, they can take wood, but they can never take the will of a man who refuses to bow. And as I tell you this, I wonder, how many of you have faced the same thing? How many of you have had someone abuse their power over you, thinking you were too small to fight back? And if you had the chance to not only defend yourself but to take everything back, would you do it? Or would you let them keep their crown, even when you held the power to break it? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know, would you rebuild, or would you rule? When the gavel came down that final day, and the judge declared the HOA guilty, I thought the weight on my shoulders would lift. And it did, but only partly. Because what I felt most, standing there in that courtroom, wasn't relief, it was fire. I had one. But this wasn't just about a courtroom victory. It wasn't just about money, or even about my demolished mansion. This was about sending a message. A message that would echo through every street, every house, every backyard where someone once felt powerless against the people who claimed to rule them. The day the HOA officially dissolved, it was almost surreal. There were no more letters in the mailbox, no more fines, no more board members creeping around with clipboards. For the first time in years, silence felt like freedom. But victory didn't feel complete, not yet. Because every time I walked past the empty lot where my mansion once stood, I felt both pride and pain. Pride because I turned their greatest act of arrogance into their downfall. Pain because that home had carried my memories and those walls were gone. Neighbors often stopped me, asking if I planned to rebuild. Some said, you should put up something bigger, grander, to show them you can't be broken. Others said, leave it empty, let it be a scar that reminds them every day of what they did. I would stand there, hands in my pockets, looking over the water, and think quietly to myself. A house is wood and stone, but power is what lasts. Weeks turned into months, and the community slowly transformed. Without the HOA's chains, people began to breathe again. Flags of every color waved proudly. Lawns grew a little wilder, gardens bloomed brighter. Kids played late into the evening without anyone handing out violation warnings. It felt alive again, human again. But the strangest part? People started coming to me. Not just for advice, but for leadership. John, they'd say, you should form a new board, one that actually helps the community. John, you should be the one making the rules now. John, we trust you. And that's when it hit me. The HOA had tried to erase me, but in the process, they had turned me into something bigger than I ever intended to be. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was the man who stood up, the man who fought back, the man who owned the block. So I took on the role, not as a dictator, not as a president with a clipboard and threats, but as a neighbor. I made it simple: no fines, no petty rules, no bullying. If we wanted something fixed, we pitched in. If a family was struggling, we helped them. If the street needed work, we worked together. And the neighborhood thrived like it never had under the old HOA. Looking back, it almost feels poetic. They destroyed my mansion, thinking they had broken me. But all they really did was free me to become something they could never control. Their greatest weapon became my greatest strength. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the dock by the lake and look out over the water. The moonlight ripples across the surface, calm and steady. And I think about that first morning, when I stood in shock as the excavators tore into my home. How powerless I felt. How broken I thought I was. And then I think about now, how the very people who once whispered against me now walk by with smiles and waves. How the neighborhood that once judged me now thanks me. How the woman who smirked at my pain can't even show her face without shame. Funny how life works. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that could have ever happened. Sometimes losing walls gives you the strength to build something bigger than walls: respect, freedom, legacy. I may rebuild the mansion one day. Maybe taller, maybe stronger, maybe grander. Or maybe I'll leave that land open, a green field by the water, a reminder carved into the heart of the block that no one, not even an HOA, can ever take down the will of a man who refuses to bend. And as I sit here telling you this story, I want you to think about something. Think about your own life. Think about the people or the systems that tried to break you, the ones who thought they had all the power. And ask yourself this: if everything you built was taken from you tomorrow, would you crumble like the walls of my mansion? Or would you rise from the rubble and turn your loss into a victory so great, the world could never forget your name? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know, are you the kind of person who breaks under pressure, or the kind of person who builds an empire from the ruins?